Okay, guys, I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about Byzantine music, and we're going to start with some stuff that you really need to know for any of Byzantine music to really make sense, for you to understand what you're doing. So, this is an introductory lesson today. It's some of the most foundational stuff that you really need to know. And if you don't understand any of this, just always come in and ask questions about it. We can go back over some things, we can review things, because these are the things that by the time you get to the end of today, you'll probably be a little bit confused, but it's going to introduce some ideas, and then we'll continue going over them until they make sense. So, to start out with, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you know, probably have some idea about with Western music, and we're going to use that to try to make sense a little bit out of Byzantine music. So, to start with, in the West, music theory really developed around the use of stringed instruments and keyed instruments. So, particularly in the church, you had the organ. So, people are using keys. We'll take a look here at a piano. And each of these keys, let's see, just going to do a share screen here. Each of these keys represents a half a step. So from here to here, that's a half a step. And then if you go two keys up, that's a whole step. So from here to here is a half a step. From here to here is a whole step. Now, in Western music, a major scale follows a particular pattern of half steps and whole steps. It goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And so we'll look at that here. So here's our root note, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And you can hear it has a very nice, bright, complete sound to it. So that's a full octave. It started on C and it ended on C. So, okay, so here's a C. So this is called the first. It's the first note of the scale. So we started on the first and we ended on the first. Perfect octave there. We notice that we hit all the white keys. And the reason for that is because a piano is the black keys are spaced in such a way that those are not the notes that you would hit in the major scale of a C. So middle C is the exact middle of the piano, and all the white keys are going to be those keys that follow that pattern of a major scale. Well, then we could say, okay, so we started on the first note and we ended on the first note. Well, what if we started on the second note and we ended on the second note? We can hear that has a very different sound to it. It sounds a little bit off. That's called the second mode. If we started on the third note and went to the third note up, that would be called the third mode, and so on. So we could start at the fourth and go to the fourth. That would be the fourth mode. Particularly, so if we go back to, this would be the sixth. So this is your first or your eighth year completed octave. This would be your sixth. So if we stop here, that's called a minor scale. So let's see, we're going to stop at this here. We can see that now has a very different sound to it. So starting on the sixth and ending on the sixth is called a minor scale, a natural minor scale. So when you hear people talking about major and minor keys, that's what they're talking about. If you start on the first and end on the first, it's a major scale. If you start on the sixth and you end on the sixth, that's a minor scale. So all of the keys are still the same. The pattern is still the same. It's just where you start and stop that makes it a different mode. And it completely changes the sound of the mode. Well, in Byzantine music, it's kind of like that. To start with, though, we have to mention that you might have heard in the sound of music, people are saying, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. They're doing a major scale there. And in Byzantine music, there's something really similar to that. But instead of saying those sounds of do, re, mi, we say a different set of sounds that goes ni pa vu ga di ke zo ni. There's still 8 notes. It's still an octave. So you're still ending and starting on the same note. But this same principle of modes applies here. What if instead of starting on ni or starting on the first note, what if we started on the second one? We could go pa vu ga di ke zo ni pa. So it sounds a little bit different. So that you have the same idea here. You can start on a different note and end on a different note to create the second mode, the third mode, the fourth mode. Now, here's where the comparison breaks down a little bit. And you have to be aware of this. Whereas in Western music, the second mode is always formed by starting on the second note and going to the second note. That pattern does not hold the same way anymore. So that was the basis of the modal system in Byzantine music. But back in the old days, they had castrati, men who had been castrated, who were vocalists that had a very broad vocal range. So they could do all of this. They had multiple octaves of vocal range typically to work with. As that was no longer done, the notes moved to reflect where most people would sing more comfortably. So you understand kind of the basis of this idea of what modes are and how they're formed. You're just aware that those the starting on the second note, ending on the second note thing, it doesn't really hold in the same way anymore. So where it does start, where it does stop, you'll find out more about that later. But this is just an introduction so that when you hear mode, you kind of know what we're talking about. Oh, this is kind of referring to some point on a scale. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about this idea, we've got a scale and then we've got modes of that scale. And the modes relate to the scale because they start at a particular point and stop at a particular point within that scale. Okay, so we have the idea that in Western music, the modes stop at this sort of very fixed pattern. Second mode is second note to second note, third mode is third note to third note. And we know that pattern doesn't really hold in that sort of uniform way anymore in Byzantine music. But there is still this modal system, and there are different scales that we use in Byzantine music. But to keep things simple, we're going to start out first with the diatonic scale. And the reason for that is I think it's the most familiar to Western ears, and it's also used in a lot of the different modes. And so by starting out with just one particular scale, we'll be able to start learning sooner some things that we can actually use in Orthros and liturgy, some things that we hear in church. So we're going to take a look at that. Give me just a second here. Okay, so we can see here, this shows those microtones. So like I was saying, it's not half steps and whole steps anymore, where everything is just either 6 or 12. We start out just like the do, re, mi. Now we start out ni, pa, vu. So like I said, it's a similar way of kind of counting which note you're on in the scale, but these sounds are different. So instead of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, we're going to say ni, pa, vu, ga, di, ke, zo, ni. And we can see here from ni to pa is an interval of 12 microtones. Going from pa to vu, it's 10. From vu to ga, it's 8. From ga to thee, it's 12. And then it's 12, 10, 8 again. So you've got what they call tetrachords, little series of 4 notes. And these repeat. The size of these intervals repeats at the top and the bottom. So we can see 12, 10, 8, 12, 10, 8. There's also this middle one, which is called the disjunctive tone. So it separates the upper tetrachord from the lower tetrachord. So these tetrachords are sort of distinctive to the way the scale sounds, and it's that you use these notes a lot. So in fourth mode, you would generally start at the, and you would hear a lot of this upper tetrachord. And then maybe at first mode, you would start down here on near pa, and you would be using this lower tetrachord. Okay, so this is the scale that we'll be using And it's the sound that we're going to start to get used to hearing, kind of what things sound like when they're in the diatonic scale. Okay, so in Western music, you've got the sheet music, and each note on the staff shows you exactly what note to sing. So you're singing a C or you're singing a D, and that particular pitch is going to match exactly to the C on a piano or the C on a guitar. But here it's not like that. This is what's called a relative system. So instead of an absolute system where a C is at a fixed frequency, and anybody singing a C is going to be singing at that frequency. Now, say if I'm starting a hymn on Pa, I can start that Pa wherever my voice is comfortable, and then everybody else who's chanting along with me is going to pitch to that. So it's no longer fixed to a particular frequency on a piano. It's pitched to whatever the frequency is that's comfortable for the chanter's voice. So maybe for me, I would start out at ni pa pa. So that pa, that's going to be my pa tone. Maybe for another chanter, their pa is pa. Maybe for another one, it's pa. So you're going to match kind of wherever they start out. That's going to be your bass note. That's where pa is going to be pitched for that hymn. So it could even be different from one week to the next with the same chanter. If his voice is a little bit off that day, he might come down a little bit, or whatever the case may be. So we know that it's not an absolute system anymore. Notes at fixed frequencies. Now it's a relative system relative to wherever the chanter starts. Okay, well, if those notes on a staff kind of tell us exactly what note to sing, and now it doesn't work like that anymore, how does it work? Well, these are called neumes. So instead of notes, you have neumes, and these notes just tell you, are you going up or down or staying in the same place relative to where you were? Okay, so if we started out at Pa, this called an eson, this neume is telling you that you're going to stay at the previous pitch. So you're just going to stay at the same place. So let's see here. Right here, if we were reading this, this is a ni. This symbol means you start out at ni. So let's say if we were pitched at ni, as we read through this, we're going to go ni, 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 ni. So that's just telling us we stay at the same note. All right. So what if we needed to go up one note? Well, we would have what's called an oligon, and that just means we go up one note. It could also be if you needed a little bit of vibrato in the note, it could be called a pedasti, which is this little cup-shaped symbol here. And then you can also bend your way up to the next note. So instead of going ni pa, you might go ni pa. So that smooth transition, that's where you would have what's called a condimata. So we can see that even for a particular movement going up one note, there's a few different ways you can do that. You can just hop from one to the other, ni pa. You can go up with a vocal flutter, ni pa. So that pa, that little vibrato you've got on that note, or you can drag it up to the next note, ni pa. So three different ways you can go up one note. So we've got staying at the same, which is just the eson. Right here, this little pedestal symbol under the eson doesn't really do anything. It's vestigial, you could say. It's not really used to indicate anything anymore. So it might still be there from a tradition and orthography. It might be written that way, but if you see this symbol, just stay on the previous note. Don't worry about that pedestal symbol under the eson. Okay, so let's go over to here. So now we have these up one notes. There's one other thing that you'll need to know. So it's going to be a down one note. So this right here, the apostrophos means you go down one note, or if it has a little pedestal symbol under it, you're going to go down with a vocal flutter. So we know how to stay the same. We know how to go up one. We know how to go down one. So we can go over, we can look at this little exercise here. So we're going to start at ni, ni, and we're going to go ni pa vu ga di ke zo ni. The symbol just means to hold it in distinct period of time. You're just kind of holding it at the end of a phrase. Ni pa vu ga di ke zo ni. Ni zo ke di ga vu ga ni. So very simple, just up one at a time, hold it, stay the same, down one at a time. So a simple scale run through the diatonic scale. So once we get through that, we can see that really these neumes, these basic symbols, this is what we really need to learn first. In order to read the Byzantine sheet music, in order to follow along with the music and to eventually develop an ear for it where it starts to sound right and all of that, we have to learn what these mean so that when we see them, we know what to do. We see this, oh, I'm going up to, I'm going to jump up to straight, or I'm going to go up to and I'm going to do the little vibrato. Here again, just ascend two notes. One thing to know is that the reason some of these are the same is because you had a lot of different chanters writing sheet music over a period of time, and they might have had little variations in the way that they wrote some of these notes. So maybe one guy was writing it this way and one guy was writing it this way. And so over time, both of these kind of became normal ways to indicate that you go up two notes. You've got going up three notes. So these couple of sheets here that show you your ascending notes, all the way up to eight notes, you're really never going to use this unless you get into some advanced music. Very, very rare are you going to see these kinds of large jumps in church music like this. But we learn these things, how to go down, going down four notes. It looks like a four, so that one's really easy. But you'll learn these, and I would really recommend that you get some little cards, make yourself some flashcards, and on one side just draw the neume, and then on the back side write the description and what it's called. So, Eson, same value. Again here, the oligon under it doesn't affect it. It's just an Eson, it stays the same, right? So you'll just write the character, and then on the back you write the name of it and what it does. So after a few weeks, you should get to where you pretty well know these. You see it, you know what it is, you know what you need to do. And then the important thing that we'll really work on for a few sessions to get to where we're ready to start on some material from Orthros is going to be these exercises. So these exercises are just going to get you to where you're used to being able to read the music and make it sound pretty well. Ni ni pa pa vu vu ga ga di di ke ke zo zo ni 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 zo zo ke ke di di ga ga vu vu pa pa ni ni. So you'll kind of work on some of these exercises, and then we'll start to look at some of the easier stuff from Orthros, starting out with God is the Lord. Some things that you hear every week pertaining to Orthros, and that then you can really kind of get to the chant stand and just see what's going on and be able to look at it, hear it, start to get some actual experience and practice at working with it. So now that we went over some of the basics, we've got the neumes, so we know how to read the page. We've got the idea of the scales and the modes, how those ideas relate to each other to create the sounds we hear in Byzantine music. There's a couple things that I'll say as far as the resources for people that are learning this. The two most important things are going to be these two books. This one, so it's called Byzantine Music Theory and Practice Guide, and let me share screen here so you can see this. Okay, so this one here, this is the one that the stuff I showed you on the screen with the neumes, the scales, that kind of stuff, it came from this book. And the thing that's good about this book is it has a bunch of exercises. It's what we'll be working with to begin with. Very easy exercises that get you reading the notes and familiarize you with some of the basics about the scales, the modes, that kind of stuff. Gets you the basic skill level you needed to get started with this. So it's really good for someone who's an absolute beginner. And then the other thing that we'll need One other thing about this is it does come with a CD that has recordings for all of the exercises. So all of these little exercises that we're doing, the scale runs, kind of what the different scales sound like, because we will get to some other scales later on, chromatic scale, hard chromatic scale, and harmonic. It's good to have recordings of all that stuff, and it comes with this book. The other book is this one. It was recently published by John Michael Boyer, who was involved with the digital chant stand. He's a chanter in New Orleans. And this book really is the first of its kind in the English language to where it extensively and systematically teaches Byzantine chant. So once you kind of get to where you've got the basic skill set, you're reading music, but you've got a lot of other questions and you're really ready to fill in the gaps in that knowledge and get to where you really understand music, you need this book. And so I recently got this myself. A lot of the stuff that I was unclear on that has been very hard to track down in English, clear teaching on it, it looks like it's all in here. So I haven't had time to read the whole book yet, although I certainly will. So definitely to start out with, get Byzantine Music Theory and Practice Guide from the Archdiocese School of Byzantine Music, and then Byzantine Chant: The Received Tradition by John Michael Boyer. With those two books, you'll really have all of the resources you need to completely learn Byzantine music. And again, I would just emphasize starting out with make the flashcards, get the neumes down on flashcards, look at them. If you spend 10 minutes a day for a couple of weeks, you'll know those neumes pretty well. And be at the point where you can really start to read some music and be able to put those skills into use. So that really covers it. Just go back over this video and watch if there's anything you're unclear on, and then come in and ask questions, and we'll keep working on all this and make sure that we get comfortable with this introductory material.